The heart monitor beeped steadily in the sterile hospital room. My mother lay motionless, tubes and wires connecting her to machines that were keeping her alive. The doctor had just told me she needed emergency surgery, a complex procedure that could cost over $80,000. I stood there, my world collapsing around me, while my wife of 5 years sat quietly in the corner watching me panic. I turned to her with tears in my eyes and said the words I would later regret more than anything I had ever spoken. I called her worthless. I told her she had never contributed anything meaningful to our marriage, that she was just a pretty face who had married me for my money. She didn't cry. She didn't argue. She simply stood up, walked to the nurse's station, and whispered something that would change everything I thought I knew about the woman I had married. Stick with me while I share my story. And if it touches you, don't forget to support our channel by hitting that subscribe button, dropping a like, and sharing it with the people you care about. My name is Derek Morrison. For most of my life, I believed that success was measured by money, status, and the ability to provide. I was raised in a modest household where my father worked double shifts and my mother stayed home to raise my sister and me. From an early age, I watched my parents struggle with bills, worry about medical expenses, and sacrifice their own happiness to give us a decent life. I promised myself that I would never live like that. I would become successful, wealthy, and secure. I would never have to beg for anything. I worked relentlessly through college, took on internships that paid nothing, and climbed the corporate ladder with a single-minded determination that impressed my bosses and alienated most of my friends. By the time I was 30, I was a senior account executive at a major financial firm in Chicago. I had a corner office, a six-figure salary, and the kind of lifestyle that made my parents proud. I drove a luxury car, wore designer suits, and dined at restaurants where the appetizers cost more than my mother's weekly grocery budget. When I met Alina, I was immediately drawn to her quiet elegance. She was a graphic designer who worked from home, creating beautiful logos and branded materials for small businesses. She was gentle, compassionate, and never seemed impressed by my money. She didn't care about my corner office or my expensive watch. She cared about the books I read, the music I loved, and the dreams I had beyond my career. I fell hard for her because she made me feel like I was more than my bank account. We married after 2 years of dating in a small ceremony that she insisted should be intimate and personal. I wanted a grand wedding at a 5-star venue with hundreds of guests, but Alina convinced me to keep it simple. She said she didn't need a spectacle to prove our love. At the time, I thought she was being humble and sensible. I told myself I had found a woman who valued substance over style. I never suspected that her reluctance to show off had anything to do with hiding something. Our marriage was comfortable. Alina worked from home and took care of the household while I focused on my career. She cooked meals, maintained our apartment, and always seemed to know what I needed before I asked. She was supportive of my ambitions, never complained about my long hours, and made our home a peaceful sanctuary away from the stress of my job. I rewarded her with gifts, vacations, and a generous allowance that I believed was more than fair. But there was one thing that bothered me. Alina never seemed to need anything from me. She never asked for money beyond what I gave her. She never pressured me to buy her expensive things or take her on lavish trips. She was content with simple pleasures, quiet evenings, and meaningful conversations. I told myself I was lucky to have such an uncomplicated wife. I didn't realize that her independence was a sign of something I had completely overlooked. When my mother fell ill, my entire world shattered. She had been feeling tired for months, but she brushed it off as old age. By the time the doctors discovered the tumor, it had already grown dangerously large. The surgery was high risk, the recovery would be brutal, and the cost was astronomical. My father had passed away years earlier. My sister lived across the country with her own family, and I was suddenly the only person responsible for saving my mother's life. I sat in that hospital room, staring at the bill that the insurance wouldn't cover, and felt the familiar panic of financial insecurity creeping back into my chest. All my success, all my careful planning, and I was still facing the same nightmare my parents had faced. I had the money, but it would drain my savings, affect my investments, and delay the future I had been building. I was ashamed to admit that part of me was calculating the cost instead of just focusing on my mother's survival. Alina sat quietly beside me, her hand resting on my arm. I could feel her eyes on me, waiting for me to say something. When I finally looked at her, I saw nothing but calm compassion on her face. She wasn't panicking. She wasn't worried about money. She just looked at me like everything was going to be okay. That made me angry. How could she be so calm while my mother was dying and I was facing financial ruin? She had never worked a demanding job. She had never struggled to pay a bill. She didn't understand what it was like to carry the weight of responsibility. That's when I lost control. The stress of the situation, the fear of losing my mother, and the resentment I had been building for years exploded out of me. I told Alina she was worthless. I said she had never contributed anything of value to our marriage. I reminded her that I paid for everything, that she lived a comfortable life because of my hard work, and that she had no right to sit there looking serene while I was drowning in crisis. I said things that I had been thinking for years but had never dared to voice. Alina didn't respond. She didn't defend herself or fight back. She just looked at me with a sadness that I didn't understand at the time. Then she stood up and walked out of the hospital room. I assumed she was going to cry in the bathroom or call her friends to complain about her terrible husband. I was so caught up in my own anger that I didn't notice where she was actually going. She walked directly to the nurse's station, spoke a few quiet words to the head nurse, and then disappeared into a hallway I had never noticed before. I didn't follow her. I was too busy feeling sorry for myself to care what she was doing. I assumed she was avoiding me, hiding from the confrontation she had no ability to handle. I was wrong. 20 minutes later, a team of surgeons entered my mother's room. They introduced themselves and explained that the operation would begin within the hour. I was confused because the hospital administrator had told me the surgery was on hold until payment arrangements were made. I asked the surgeon who had authorized the procedure. He looked at me strangely and said the hospital owner had personally approved it. I blinked in confusion. The hospital owner? I didn't know anything about a hospital owner. I assumed it was some mysterious corporation that owned several medical facilities. I had no idea that the hospital had a single owner, someone who lived in the city and walked through the same streets I walked. I asked the surgeon who the owner was, and he smiled politely before explaining that the ownership was confidential unless the owner chose to reveal themselves. The surgery proceeded, and I spent the next 6 hours pacing the waiting room, alternating between praying for my mother's survival and fretting about the cost that would eventually come due. Alina didn't return. She didn't call or text. I was angry at her for abandoning me during the most difficult moment of my life. I told myself that this confirmed everything I had always suspected. She was selfish, weak, and completely useless in a crisis. When the surgery finally ended, the surgeon walked out with good news. My mother had survived the operation. The tumor had been successfully removed, and while the recovery would be long, she would live. I cried with relief and gratitude. For a brief moment, I forgot about the money, the fight, and Alina's disappearance. I was just grateful that I still had my mother. The next morning, a hospital administrator came to my mother's room to discuss the next steps. I braced myself for the financial conversation. I pulled out my credit card, my checkbook, and my phone to start making transfer arrangements. The administrator smiled at me and said there was nothing to worry about. All expenses had been covered. The hospital owner had personally authorized a full coverage of the surgery and all associated costs. I stared at the administrator in disbelief. I asked who the owner was, demanding to know why a stranger would pay for my mother's surgery. The administrator hesitated for a moment before looking down at her tablet. She said she wasn't authorized to disclose the owner's identity, but she did have one piece of information she was allowed to share. The owner's name was already in my contacts list. My mind raced through every name I could think of. I knew no one wealthy enough to own a hospital. My contacts list was filled with clients, colleagues, and casual acquaintances. None of them had the resources or the motive to pay for my mother's surgery. I pulled out my phone and scrolled through my contacts, trying to solve the puzzle. Then I froze. Alina, her contact photo stared back at me, the same serene smile I had seen so many times. I had never questioned who she really was. I had never asked about her family, her background, or the life she had lived before we met. I had assumed she was a simple graphic designer who had married a successful man and enjoyed a comfortable life. I had never considered that she might have been hiding something far more significant. I called the hospital's main line and asked to speak with the owner's office. The receptionist connected me to an administrative assistant who asked who was calling. I said Derek Morrison. There was a pause, and then the assistant said she would see if the owner was available. A few moments later, a familiar voice came through the phone. "Hello, Derek." It was Alina. I couldn't speak. I couldn't breathe. Everything I thought I knew about my wife was suddenly impossible. She calmly explained that she had been waiting for the right moment to tell me the truth. She had inherited the hospital from her grandmother, an accomplished surgeon who had built the facility from the ground up. Alina had been running the hospital behind the scenes for years, managing finances, overseeing operations, and ensuring it remained one of the best medical facilities in the city. She had never told me because she wanted to be loved for who she was, not for what she owned. I felt sick. I remembered all the times I had talked down to her, treated her like a dependent, and made her feel small. I remembered calling her worthless while she was waiting to tell me that she had the power to save my mother's life. I remembered thinking I was superior to her because I earned a good salary. All those years, she could have bought and sold me 100 times over without even noticing. Alina told me she had always known the truth would come out eventually. She had planned to tell me when the timing was right, after she was sure our marriage was built on genuine love and mutual respect. But the more I talked about her lack of contribution, and the more I complained about supporting her, the harder it became to reveal the truth. She started to wonder if I would stay with her, if I knew she was the wealthy one. I asked her why she had hidden it for so long. Her answer broke my heart. She said she had grown up watching people fawn over her grandmother's money. They pretended to love her while secretly hoping to benefit from her wealth. Alina had been hurt too many times by fake affection. She wanted to be with someone who loved her without knowing the truth. She had hoped that I would be that person. The hospital administrator returned to my mother's room with a contract for me to sign. It was a confidentiality agreement, standard for any transaction involving the hospital owner's personal affairs. I signed it without reading it properly because I was still in shock. As I handed it back, the administrator quietly mentioned that Alina had also authorized a long-term care plan for my mother. She would receive the best treatment available for the rest of her life, with no financial burden on me at all. I drove home that evening with a knot in my stomach. My mother was alive. She was going to recover. That was the most important thing. But I had traded one crisis for another. I had to face my wife and apologize for every hurtful thing I had ever said. I had to admit that I had been wrong about everything. When I walked through the door of our apartment, Alina was sitting on a couch with a glass of wine in her hand. She didn't look angry. She looked exhausted. I sat down across from her and said I was sorry. I said I had been arrogant, blind, and cruel. I said she had every right to hate me for the way I had treated her. Alina stared at me for a long moment. Then she said she wasn't angry. She was sad. She had spent 5 years trying to be the perfect wife, hoping that eventually I would see her value, without needing to see her bank balance. She had stayed quiet when I belittled her. She had accepted my condescension because she believed I would eventually come around. She had never once used her money or status to gain an advantage in our marriage, even when I made her feel small. But my words at the hospital had finally broken something inside her. She realized that no matter how long she waited, I would never see her as an equal. I would always view her as someone beneath me, someone who needed my protection and support. She wasn't angry. She was just tired. She had given me everything and received nothing but criticism in return. I tried to defend myself, but every excuse I could think of sounded pathetic. I had called my wife worthless while she was quietly owning the hospital that saved my mother's life. There was no defense for that. There was no explanation that made it acceptable. I had failed the most basic test of marriage. I had treated my partner like an accessory instead of an equal. Alina told me she was moving out for a while. She needed space to think about whether our marriage could survive the damage I had caused. She didn't say she was leaving forever. She just said she needed time. I nodded because I knew I had no right to argue. I had pushed her away with my arrogance. I had created this situation. It was my responsibility to fix it. The weeks that followed were the loneliest of my life. My mother recovered at the hospital, completely unaware of the drama that had unfolded around her surgery. She asked about Alina, and I lied, saying she was visiting family. The nurses treated me with quiet respect, but I could see the judgment in their eyes. They knew who I was and what I had done. The entire hospital seemed to be watching me, waiting to see if I would finally become the man Alina deserved. I spent those weeks thinking about everything I had taken for granted. Alina had never once complained about my long hours. She had never asked for expensive gifts or demanded more than I was willing to give. She had supported my career, maintained our home, and loved me without reservation. She had never needed my money because she had always had her own. She had never needed my status because she was more successful than I could have ever imagined, and I had repaid her by calling her worthless. The irony was staggering. I had spent my entire life chasing wealth and status, believing they were the measures of a person's worth. I had looked down on Alina because she didn't have the same material success as me. Meanwhile, she was quietly running a hospital that provided life-saving care to thousands of people. She had more wealth and influence than I would ever have, and she had never once used it to make me feel small. When Alina finally agreed to meet me for coffee, I was nervous. I had spent weeks rehearsing what I would say. I had written long letters, planned elaborate apologies, and imagined every possible version of the conversation. But when I sat down across from her, all those words disappeared. I just looked at her and said the only thing that mattered. I told her I was sorry for every time I had made her feel small. I was sorry for thinking my money made me better than her. I was sorry for not seeing the incredible person she was. I said I didn't expect her to forgive me immediately or at all. I just wanted her to know that I finally understood how wrong I had been. Alina listened quietly. She didn't interrupt or react emotionally. She just let me speak and gave me the respect I had never given her. When I finished, she nodded slowly and said she appreciated my words. But she also said words were easy. The real test would be whether I could actually change. She needed to know if I could treat her as an equal, not just because she was wealthy, but because she was worthy of respect regardless of her money. I promised to try. I said I would work every day to become the husband she deserved. I told her I had started therapy to understand why I had been so insecure and controlling. I said I was reading books about emotional intelligence and healthy relationships. I was determined to become a better person, not just for her, but for myself. She smiled for the first time that afternoon. She said she had noticed the changes in me during our time apart. My mother had told her I had been visiting more often and helping with her recovery. The nurses had mentioned I was more patient and kind. Alina said she had been watching from a distance, waiting to see if my transformation was genuine. She hadn't been sure at first, but she was starting to believe I might actually mean what I said. We talked for hours that day. For the first time in our marriage, I truly listened to Alina. She told me about her grandmother, the brilliant surgeon who had built the hospital from nothing. She talked about her childhood, the loneliness of being wealthy in a world that seemed to hate the rich, and her desire to find someone who loved her for who she was. She explained that she hadn't hidden her wealth to deceive me. She had hidden it to protect herself from the very thing I had proven to be true. She was afraid I would only love her for her money. I realized that the greatest tragedy was not that Alina had kept a secret. It was that I had given her every reason to keep it. I had made her feel unsafe, unloved, and unvalued. I had created an environment where she couldn't trust me with the truth because she knew I would weaponize it against her. That was not a reflection of her character. It was a reflection of mine. As the weeks turned into months, Alina and I slowly rebuilt our marriage from the ground up. I moved back into the apartment, but everything felt different. I stopped talking about my career as if it was the most important thing in the world. I stopped complaining about money and status. I started asking Alina about her day, her work, and her dreams. I finally started treating her like a partner instead of a dependent. Alina opened up to me about the hospital. She showed me the behind-the-scenes work she did to ensure patients received the best care possible. She explained the financial struggles of running a medical facility, the balance between profit and compassion, and the constant pressure to keep everything running smoothly. She was not just an owner. She was an active leader who cared deeply about every patient who walked through the doors. I started volunteering at the hospital on weekends. I didn't do anything glamorous. I just helped with simple tasks, answered phones, and assisted families who were struggling to navigate the confusing medical system. I wanted to be part of the world Alina had built, not as a spectator, but as a contributor. I wanted to prove that I had changed. Slowly, I began to see the world differently. The patients I met were not cases or dollar signs. They were people with families, fears, and hopes. The doctors and nurses were not just employees. They were heroes who gave everything to save lives. Alina's world was not about money. It was about making a difference. And I had been too blind to see it. One evening, after a long shift at the hospital, I came home exhausted but fulfilled. Alina was waiting for me with dinner and a smile. She said she had been thinking about something. She wanted to know if I would be interested in taking on a more significant role at the hospital, not as a doctor or a nurse, but as a patient advocate, someone who helped families navigate the financial and emotional challenges of serious illness. I was shocked. I didn't have a medical background or any formal training, but Alina said that was exactly why I was qualified. I had been through the experience myself. I understood the panic, the fear, and the desperation of watching someone you love fight for their life. I knew what it was like to feel powerless. I could use that experience to help others who were going through the same thing. I accepted the offer without hesitation. For the first time in my life, I felt like I was doing something meaningful. My job had always been about money. It had been about climbing the ladder and accumulating wealth. But this was different. This was about making a difference in people's lives. This was about being part of something bigger than myself. The months that followed were the most rewarding of my life. I worked with families, helped them understand their options, and connected them with resources they didn't know existed. I shared my own story of fear and redemption, hoping it would give them hope. I watched people who were terrified and broken gradually find strength and courage. I helped them see that there was a light at the end of the tunnel. Alina watched my transformation with quiet pride. She never said, "I told you so." She never reminded me of how wrong I had been. She just supported me and encouraged me to keep growing. Her love was not conditional on my success or status. It was based on who I had become. That was the greatest gift she could have given me. One day, a family approached me in the hospital waiting room. They looked desperate, their faces etched with fear and exhaustion. I sat down with them and listened to their story. They were afraid of the cost of treatment. They didn't know how they would pay for the surgery their father needed. I saw myself in their eyes, the same panic I had felt when my mother was lying in that hospital bed. I told them there was nothing to worry about. The hospital had programs in place to help families in their situation. I explained the options, connected them with a financial counselor, and assured them that their father would receive the care he needed regardless of their ability to pay. As they walked away with tears of gratitude in their eyes, I realized that Alina had been right all along. The greatest wealth was not money. It was the ability to help others. When Alina and I celebrated our 6th anniversary, we did something different. Instead of going out to dinner or buying expensive gifts, we spent the day at the hospital together. We visited patients, talked to families, and helped in the children's wing. It was not a glamorous celebration, but it was the most meaningful one we had ever had. At the end of the day, Alina looked at me and said she was proud of the person I had become. I remembered the day I had called her worthless. I remembered the anger, the arrogance, and the pain I had caused. I wished I could take it all back, but I knew that was impossible. All I could do was spend the rest of my life making up for it. I looked at Alina and told her that she was the strongest, most incredible person I had ever known. I said she had taught me what true success really meant. She smiled and said that was the first time I had ever truly seen her. Looking back on that whole experience, I understand something now that I never could have grasped before. I used to believe that worth was something you earned through money, status, and achievement. I thought the person with the most things was the most valuable person. I spent my whole life chasing that illusion. I hurt the people I loved. I judged others harshly. I believed I was better than everyone around me. But what I learned from Alina is that worth is not about what you have. It is about who you are. It is about how you treat other people, how you show up for the ones you love, and how you use your resources to make the world a better place. Alina had more money than I could have ever imagined, and she never once used it to make me feel small. She let me discover the truth on my own. She gave me the space to grow. That was the greatest gift she could have given me. I also learned that marriage is not a competition. It is a partnership. It is not about who earns more money, who has more status, or who is more successful. It is about two people supporting each other, lifting each other up, and building a life together. I had failed at that for years because I was too focused on myself. I had forgotten that the most important thing was not my career or my wealth. It was the person who loved me despite all my flaws. There is no easy way to admit you were wrong about someone you love. There is no gentle way to confront the fact that you were the villain in your own story. But I am grateful for that painful wake-up call because it forced me to become a better person. It humbled me in a way that nothing else could have. It made me realize that love is not a transaction. It is a commitment. It is showing up even when it is hard and choosing your partner every single day. Today, Alina and I are stronger than ever. We still have disagreements and challenges, but we face them together. I no longer look down on her or think I am better than her. I respect her, admire her, and love her more than I ever thought possible. She is not just my wife. She is my partner, my mentor, and my best friend. She taught me what true strength looks like, and I will be forever grateful. My mother, of course, loves Alina more than she loves me now. She jokes that I was the best thing that never happened to her son. She says Alina is the daughter she always wanted, and I am just a guy who came with the package. I laugh along because I know she is right. Alina saved my mother's life, and she saved my soul in the process. There is no debt I could ever repay for that. If there is one lesson I want you to take from my story, it is this. The people we love are often far more extraordinary than we give them credit for. We get so caught up in our own egos and insecurities that we fail to see the incredible human beings standing right in front of us. Do not make the same mistake I did. Do not judge someone's worth by their bank account or their job title. Look deeper. See the person behind the surface. You might be surprised by what you find. And if you have someone in your life who has quietly supported you, loved you, and stood by you, do not take them for granted. Do not wait until a crisis to realize their value. Tell them now. Show them now. Because the greatest tragedy in life is not losing someone. It is failing to appreciate them while they are still with you. Alina once told me that the best revenge is living well. But I think the best revenge is something else entirely. It is becoming the person you should have been all along. It is learning from your mistakes and using that pain to grow. It is letting go of your ego and embracing humility. That is what I am trying to do. That is the legacy I want to leave behind. My story is not about a rich hospital owner or a foolish husband. It is about love, redemption, and the power of transformation. It is about realizing that we are all capable of change, no matter how far we have fallen. It is about believing that second chances are real, and that we can become better versions of ourselves if we are brave enough to try. I am not the same man who called his wife worthless in a hospital room. I am someone else now, someone I am proud to be, and that transformation started with one simple truth. The person I loved was not the one who needed to change. It was me. Once I accepted that, everything else fell into place. Alina and I are still writing our story. We have so many adventures ahead of us. There are more hospitals to run, more families to help, and more lives to touch. But this time, we're doing it together as equals, as partners, as two people who finally see each other clearly. I used to think that success was about being the richest person in the room. But now I know that real success is something far more precious. It is being the kind of person who makes others feel valued, appreciated, and seen. It is loving someone completely, without conditions or expectations. It is showing up day after day and choosing to be better. That is my greatest accomplishment. Not my career, not my money, not my status. It is the man I have become because of my wife's patience, grace, and unshakable love. She showed me who I could be, and I finally had the courage to become that person. If you take nothing else from my story, take this. No one is worthless. Everyone has value, even if you cannot see it at first. And the people who love you most are often the ones you overlook. Do not make that mistake. See them, appreciate them, love them with everything you have, because you never know when the person you call worthless might turn out to be the one who saves everything that matters. Alina saved my mother's life, but she also saved me from myself. And for that, I will be grateful for the rest of my days.